Throughout history, there have always been those who sought to control not only territories and economies, but also the very existence of humanity. Absolute power is not in the hands of presidents or prime ministers. It belongs to those who control the invisible structures that govern our lives. The financial system, major tech corporations, the media, and even the way we perceive reality. But for a small group operating in the shadows, this control is still not enough. For them, true dominance can only be achieved when the population is reduced and the survivors are completely dependent on the system they have created. But who are these people, and what are their true intentions? How are they shaping the world in ways most people don't even notice? And most importantly, how is this plan being carried out right now, right before our eyes, without us realizing it? For a long time, we have been led to believe that world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, and heads of state, are the ones making the big decisions that shape our planet. But is that really true? When we take a deeper look, we realize that politics, as powerful as it may seem, is often nothing more than a smokescreen for those who truly move the pieces behind the scenes. The real controllers of the world do not appear in elections, do not give interviews explaining their intentions, and are often not even recognized by the public. They are bankers, tech moguls, heirs of centuries-old dynasties, and leaders of supranational organizations who hold financial power and control over key sectors of society. What unites these people is not just wealth, but the silent influence they exert over governments, financial institutions, the media, and even what we learn in schools. Among these groups, some dynasties stand out, such as the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Morgans, and Windsors. For centuries, these families have accumulated unimaginable fortunes and, more than that, have built the foundations of the global financial system. They were behind the creation of the world's largest banks, financed wars, and established international organizations that control entire economies. But the power of this elite is not limited to money. It extends to global institutions such as the World Economic Forum, WEF, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, and even organizations like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the United Nations, UN. Have you ever noticed that many political decisions are made without the consent of the population? This happens because these groups bring together top leaders and CEOs of the world's largest corporations to determine the course of humanity without any public participation. The World Economic Forum, led by Klaus Schwab, has been one of the main promoters of the idea of a Great Reset, a plan that aims to redefine the global economy, transform the work model, and further centralize power in the hands of a few. But who really benefits from this change? Is it ordinary people or those who already control the world's greatest fortunes? Another group worth mentioning is the Bilderberg Group, an annual meeting that brings together politicians, businessmen, bankers, and media leaders to discuss global issues behind closed doors. Created in the 1950s, this club has been the subject of numerous suspicions precisely because its meetings are highly secretive, with no meeting minutes or any form of transparency. If these people are making decisions that directly impact our lives, why are we not allowed to know what is being discussed? We also cannot forget the role of Bill Gates, one of the most influential figures within this elite. Although he is globally known as a philanthropist and advocate for technological progress, his foundation is involved in projects that go far beyond simple charity. He invests billions in tracking technologies, artificial intelligence, and even the restructuring of global food production. But is all of this truly for the good of humanity, or is there a greater objective behind it? What makes this elite so powerful is not just the amount of money they possess, but how they use their wealth to shape society's structures. Central banks, major tech corporations, and mass media outlets belong to a small group of families and investors who decide what can or cannot be said, what can or cannot be done, and even which crises should emerge to justify their actions. And this influence is not limited to the West. Prominent members of the global elite maintain discreet alliances with leaders of superpowers such as China and Russia, ensuring that the entire world follows the same path of control and surveillance. What were once rival nations now seem to act in sync, implementing the same policies and population monitoring systems. So, if governments are not truly responsible for major decisions, and if elections only serve to choose figures who follow higher orders, what does that mean for us? It means we are being guided by a system that does not care about what we want or need, but rather about what is most beneficial to those who control it. But how is this plan put into practice? How does the global elite justify measures that lead to increased control over the population? The answer lies in an idea that has been repeated countless times throughout history: the supposed need to reduce the number of people on the planet. Since the last century, a narrative has been relentlessly repeated by scientists, politicians, and corporate leaders. The planet is overcrowded, and resources are running out. Reports, conferences, and speeches claim that if there isn't a drastic reduction in population growth, we will face famine, environmental collapse, and social chaos. But what if this story isn't just a legitimate concern, but rather a carefully planned justification for a greater objective? The idea that there are too many people in the world did not emerge naturally. It was promoted by powerful foundations and think tanks funded by billionaires who have spent decades looking for ways to shape the fate of humanity. Historical documents and statements from influential figures reveal that the real problem has never been a lack of space or resources, but rather the elite's desire to create a world that is easier to control, with less resistance and more predictability. One of the earliest records of this agenda appears in the report The Limits to Growth, published by the Club of Rome in 1972. This study claimed that population growth would lead to the depletion of Earth's resources, requiring global measures to limit the number of people on the planet. This concept gained traction in the following years and inspired public policies, family planning programs, and even international strategies that, under the guise of progress, had a much deeper objective. Throughout the 20th century, various initiatives were implemented to curb population growth in different parts of the world. The Rockefeller Foundation, for example, funded birth control programs in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, promoting mass sterilizations and campaigns to reduce fertility. In the United States, during the 1920s, eugenics laws were passed, allowing certain groups to be prevented from reproducing based on genetic criteria established by the government. But this vision did not stay in the past. In 1968, the book The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich reinforced the idea that uncontrolled population growth would lead to civilization's collapse. The author suggested that governments should take radical measures to prevent the birth of millions of people, including imposing birth restrictions and even introducing chemical interventions in water and food to reduce human fertility. These ideas, although shocking, deeply influenced public policies and programs from organizations like the UN and the World Bank. Today, this narrative remains alive, but in a more sophisticated manner. The World Economic Forum, through projects such as the UN's Agenda 2030, reinforces the need for sustainable growth, promoting policies that, in practice, result in a slowdown of birth rates in both developed and emerging countries. But is all of this really about environmental concerns, or are we witnessing a disguised attempt at demographic manipulation? If we look at the numbers, we'll see that reality is quite different from what we are told. The real challenge of the future will not be excessive population, but rather a rapidly accelerating population decline. Countries like Japan, Germany, South Korea, and even the United States are experiencing an alarming drop in birth rates, creating serious economic and social problems. Cities are shrinking, the workforce is dwindling, and social security systems are on the verge of collapse. If the world were truly overpopulated, we wouldn't be seeing governments desperately trying to encourage people to have more children. But if the problem isn't overpopulation, why does the elite still insist on this narrative? One reason may be their desire to reshape society based on technology and artificial intelligence. With automation eliminating millions of jobs, a large population is no longer economically advantageous for those in power. For them, a world with fewer people means less competition for resources, less resistance to authoritarian policies, and much more efficient social control. Beyond technology, another crucial factor is the cultural shift imposed by major media corporations and the entertainment industry. Have you noticed how the idea of having children is being increasingly discouraged in popular culture? TV shows, movies, and influencers promote an individualistic lifestyle where personal success and freedom are more important than starting a family. At the same time, financial challenges increase every year, making it extremely difficult for young couples to build a stable future. But this shift in mentality did not happen by chance. For decades, organizations like the Gates Foundation and the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, have financed educational programs that emphasize the dangers of overpopulation and encourage new generations to prioritize careers and consumption over parenthood. This movement, combined with policies that increase the cost of living and economic instability, is creating a world where having children is increasingly rare, and for the elite, this is the ideal scenario. Another rarely discussed aspect of this plan involves the impact of global crises on population reduction. Throughout history, wars, pandemics, and economic collapses have always resulted in a decline in the number of people on the planet. But do these crises occur naturally, or are they orchestrated to accelerate this process? Some of the greatest humanitarian catastrophes of the past century had financial and political interests behind them, and many of them benefited precisely those who advocate for population control. So the big question remains, if population reduction is a real problem, why does the elite continue to promote measures that worsen this scenario? The answer may lie in how they want this new world to function. A society with fewer people means less resistance to surveillance systems, digital identity, and programmable currencies, making the population even more dependent on the structures created by this same elite. This plan becomes even more evident when we analyze the new monitoring and digital control technologies being implemented around the world. The complete digitalization of society is not just a matter of convenience, it is the next step to ensuring that no one escapes the system. Technology has always been presented as a symbol of progress, an inevitable path toward a more efficient, secure, and connected society. But what happens when this same technology is used not to expand human freedom, but to restrict it in an almost invisible way? What once seemed like a tool to improve our lives has turned into a silent mechanism of surveillance, where every action, every choice, and even every thought can be analyzed, categorized, and, in some cases, punished. The biggest mistake many people make is thinking that social control must be imposed explicitly, through totalitarian regimes and direct censorship. The modern world has proven that the most effective forms of control are those that people willingly accept. Over the years, we have gradually been led to trade privacy for convenience, freedom for security, and autonomy for a system that promises to make life easier but, in reality, makes us completely dependent on it. One of the most advanced forms of this new control system is the global digital identity. Unlike physical documents, which can be used independently, digital identity is connected to a centralized database that records every aspect of an individual's life. This concept has already been implemented in countries like India through the Aadhaar system, which unified the biometric and financial information of over 1.3 billion people. In theory, this was meant to facilitate access to public services, but in practice, it allowed the government to freeze bank accounts and restrict benefits for citizens who did not comply with certain guidelines. Now, this same model is being expanded globally through projects like ID 2020, promoted by the World Economic Forum and other entities. The proposal is simple: create a unique digital identity for every human being on the planet, integrating personal, financial, medical, and even travel history data. Sounds harmless, right? But imagine a future where, without this ID, you cannot access banking services, buy food, or even leave your country. Who guarantees that this system will not be used as a large-scale social control tool? But digital identity is just one piece of this puzzle. Another drastic change that is happening, almost without resistance, is the transition to a completely cashless system. Central banks around the world are already testing so-called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, which would replace cash with a fully digital financial system. Unlike traditional money, which can be spent freely and anonymously, CBDCs allow governments to track all transactions and even limit how and where you can use your own money. In China, this model is already in operation with the digital yuan, which has been integrated into the government's social credit system. If a citizen criticizes the regime, for example, they may have their transactions blocked, lose access to public transportation, or be denied a loan. This is no longer a theoretical concept. It is already being applied and could be adopted by other countries under the pretext of financial security. But are we really safer or just more controlled? However, the true danger of this digital system is not just in the economy but in the fusion of technology and biology. The concept of transhumanism, once confined to science fiction, is now being promoted by companies like Neuralink, founded by Elon Musk, and by organizations such as the World Economic Forum, which advocates for the integration of the human brain with artificial intelligence. The promise is revolutionary: to enhance our cognitive abilities, enable people with physical disabilities to regain movement, and even create direct connections between the mind and the internet. But what if this technology is used for a different purpose? Imagine a future where thoughts can be monitored in real time, where memories can be accessed, or where your own brain can be programmed to align with the directives of a centralized system. This might sound like an exaggeration, but tech companies are already developing algorithms capable of predicting behavioral patterns and even anticipating crimes before they are committed. If an algorithm can decide that someone poses a social risk, what would stop governments or corporations from taking preventive action against that person? Another crucial aspect of this new digital world is virtual and augmented reality, which is increasingly being promoted as humanity's next big step. The metaverse, a concept popularized by Facebook, now Meta, proposes a parallel reality where people can work, entertain themselves, and even build entire lives within a digital environment. But does this future truly mean more freedom, or is it just a way to keep people permanently connected to a system that can be controlled and manipulated at any time? The truth is that each of these technologies, digital identity, programmable money, human-machine fusion, and alternative realities, is presented as an inevitable advancement. But who said we have no choice? Have you noticed that there is never a real debate about the impacts of these changes? That we are always led to believe this is the only possible path? This doesn't mean that technology itself is the problem, but rather how it is being used. Looking back, we see that technological advancements have always been introduced gradually until they became indispensable. First, digital money partially replaced physical cash. Then came banking apps, contactless payments, and now, programmable currencies. The same happened with social media. First a tool for interaction, then a mechanism for censorship and narrative control. If society does not question these changes now, it may soon be too late. But if the elite already control technology, money, and information, what else can be manipulated on a large scale? The answer may lie in the most fundamental sector for human survival: food. Food has always been one of the main pillars of civilization. For thousands of years, humans have cultivated their own food, domesticated animals, and built societies around the abundance or scarcity of natural resources. But for the first time in history, this process is being taken out of people's hands and transferred to a small group of corporations and governments. If technology and money are already under the control of the global elite, what would happen if food were also completely dominated by these same groups? What we eat defines our health, our energy levels, and even our independence. And that is precisely why food control has become one of the central objectives of the global elite. In recent years, we have seen a strong campaign promoting the idea that the current food system is unsustainable and needs to be restructured. But is this change truly meant to protect the environment, or is there a larger plan in motion? One where a select few will have the power to decide what humanity can and cannot consume. The first sign of this transformation is the monopoly over agricultural land. In a world where food comes from the land, those who control the land control the food. In the United States, for example, Bill Gates has become the largest private owner of farmland, acquiring more than 270,000 acres in less than a decade. But he is not alone. Large corporations, investment funds, and even environmental NGOs are buying and regulating land worldwide, making it increasingly difficult for small farmers to engage in traditional agriculture. What happens when these few entities decide what can and cannot be planted? Beyond land ownership, there is a growing genetic manipulation of agricultural production. Companies like Monsanto, now Bayer, have developed genetically modified seeds that, unlike traditional seeds, cannot be replanted, forcing farmers to buy them every season. To make matters worse, increasingly strict international regulations are limiting the use of natural seeds, making independent farming virtually unfeasible. If a farmer cannot plant without permission, is he still truly in control of his own production? But the elite's plan doesn't stop at agriculture. The biggest target of this food restructuring is meat. In recent years, there has been an intense campaign to convince the population that livestock farming is unsustainable and must be replaced with synthetic alternatives. Companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, funded by Silicon Valley investors, are promoting plant-based meats and lab-grown meat as the only viable solutions to feed the world in the future. The argument seems noble, reducing environmental impact. But in practice, we are trading a natural food source for highly industrialized products, controlled by a small group of companies and dependent on technological patents. Today, we can choose between buying meat from a local butcher or a major supermarket. But what will happen when real meat is eliminated from the market and replaced with only one option: artificial meat? This dietary shift is not being implemented solely through advertising campaigns. Governments in several countries have already begun heavily taxing livestock and reducing subsidies for cattle farming, making meat increasingly unaffordable for most people. The ultimate goal seems to be transforming meat consumption into a luxury for the wealthy, while the general population depends on synthetic proteins produced by billionaire corporations. And meat is not the only target of this reformulation. There is also a growing push to promote insect consumption as an alternative food source. Organizations like the UN and the World Economic Forum have been encouraging the idea that humanity must abandon its traditional diet and start consuming larvae, crickets, and other insects as a primary protein source. Sound absurd? Then consider that in several countries, products containing insect flour are already being quietly incorporated into processed foods, without proper consumer notification. The issue here is not just a dietary change, but the elimination of choice. If meat is becoming unaffordable and traditional foods are being restricted, how long will it take before insects become the only available option for most of the population? But food control is not limited to what we eat. The way food is produced, distributed, and sold is also being radically transformed. In recent years, we have seen a massive push for the digitalization of the food supply chain, where every product can be tracked from its origin to the final consumer. The official justification for this is ensuring food safety, but the technology behind this tracking could be used to restrict access to certain foods based on social and environmental criteria. For example, some companies are already testing carbon credit systems for food, where every purchase is recorded and scored according to its environmental impact. If your consumption exceeds a certain limit, you may be prevented from buying certain products or be taxed more heavily. What happens if, in the future, a simple algorithm adjustment determines that you have reached your monthly quota for meat or rice, and now you can only purchase alternative proteins and synthetic foods? Perhaps the most concerning aspect of this change is the impact of ultra-processed foods on public health. While we are encouraged to abandon natural foods and consume synthetic products, the rates of chronic diseases have skyrocketed. Obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular problems have never been more common, and much of this is linked to the excessive consumption of industrialized, nutrient-deficient foods. This leads to an unsettling question. Why are we being encouraged to abandon natural foods and consume increasingly artificial products? And, more importantly, who truly benefits from this? If we look at the structure of major food and pharmaceutical corporations, we will see that they are owned by the same investment funds, such as BlackRock and Vanguard. This means that the companies promoting ultra-processed foods are the same ones profiting from the medications needed to treat the health issues caused by those foods. It is a perfect cycle of dependence. First, they sell you the food that makes you sick, then they sell you the medication to treat the symptoms, but never the cure. But how has this radical change in the food system been accepted without resistance? How have millions of people come to believe that their traditional diet is harmful, while lab-created artificial foods are the solution? The answer lies in the most powerful sector of modern society, the media and propaganda, which shape how we perceive reality and ensure that all these changes are accepted without question. What truly defines what we believe to be true? If history has taught us anything, it is that information has always been a powerful weapon in the hands of those who seek to control entire societies. In the past, narrative dominance was exercised by kings, priests, and totalitarian governments. Today, it has been outsourced to media conglomerates, tech giants, and invisible algorithms that shape collective perception without most people even realizing it. But modern manipulation goes far beyond simple government propaganda. It is sophisticated, carefully planned, and, above all, designed to create an environment where people not only accept but actively defend the changes imposed by the elite. This control process is based on the construction of narratives, and narratives must be repeated until they become unquestionable truths. Traditional media, which once served as a space for independent investigations, now operates as a tool to validate specific agendas. Have you ever noticed how all major global crises follow the same pattern? First, a problem is introduced with alarming headlines. The population, bombarded with increasingly dramatic news, enters a state of fear and urgency. The solution, already pre-planned, is then presented as the only possible alternative. And those who dare to question this cycle are quickly discredited, labeled as extremists or spreaders of misinformation. This model of public opinion manipulation has been perfected for decades. In the 20th century, Edward Bernays, considered the father of public relations, explained how the masses could be guided through repetition and emotion rather than concrete facts. The goal is not simply to present information, but to create a psychological context where the only acceptable reaction is the one predefined by the architects of the narrative. Today, this concept has been taken to a new level. With just a few corporations controlling global media, the diversity of opinions has been replaced by a unified flow of information, where what is deemed true or false is determined not by logic but by political and economic convenience. Censorship, once seen as an authoritarian and explicit act, now happens subtly and silently. People are not outright forbidden from speaking, but their voices are drowned out by algorithms that reduce their reach, make their content disappear from search results, or apply labels that lead viewers to discredit them before even hearing what they have to say. Social media, once promoted as a space for free expression, has become the greatest tool for surveillance and manipulation in history. Every click, every like, every share contributes to the construction of a detailed psychological profile, allowing companies and governments to predict and influence individual and collective behaviors. Another aspect of this social engineering is the use of pop culture as a tool for mental conditioning. Movies, series, and even music play a crucial role in mass programming, gradually introducing concepts that will later be accepted without resistance. Have you noticed how many of the control technologies being implemented today first appeared in science fiction? The concept of cities monitored by smart cameras, centralized digital currencies, and even social credit systems were explored in stories decades before becoming reality. This is not a coincidence. This technique, known as predictive programming, is used to prepare the public mind for changes that would otherwise be rejected. When they are finally introduced into society, they no longer seem as threatening. After all, we have been conditioned to accept them as a natural progression of technological advancement. But the most fascinating part of this process is that it does not rely on coercion. Modern manipulation makes people themselves the defenders of the imposed narrative, suppressing those who try to question it. The technique works because it exploits one of humanity's greatest fears, the fear of social isolation. In a world where personal validation occurs mainly in the digital space, being labeled as someone who believes in conspiracies or who challenges the consensus can be socially destructive. The result is a phenomenon where people not only accept the official version of events but become its fiercest guardians, attacking and ridiculing anyone who presents an alternative perspective. This war against critical thinking is not new, but it has never been as effective as it is now. In the past, dictatorships had to rely on military forces and explicit censorship to silence dissenters. Today, a simple algorithm adjustment is enough to eliminate an unwanted point of view. And if everything you see, read, and hear is filtered before it reaches you, how can you be sure that your worldview is not being artificially constructed? The normalization of surveillance and social control is also a key piece of this puzzle. For years, we have been led to believe that privacy is an outdated concept, a luxury that must be sacrificed in the name of security. But does this sacrifice really make us safer? Or does it simply turn us into increasingly transparent citizens for governments and corporations that, at the same time, become increasingly opaque? Since the 2001 terrorist attacks, mass monitoring laws have been implemented under the justification of combating terrorism. 2 decades later, these tools are not only still in place but have expanded into areas that have nothing to do with public safety. And as new crises arise, new layers of surveillance are added, always with the promise that they are temporary. But in practice, they become permanent. The biggest mistake we can make is believing we are immune to this manipulation. Believing that, somehow, we can separate truth from illusion simply because we feel more informed than the average person. The system itself is designed to create this false sense of intellectual independence. But if all sources of information pass through the same filters, if all major platforms respond to the same interests, do we really have access to the truth? Perhaps the most important question is not just how the media manipulates, but rather what the ultimate goal of this manipulation is. If we have already reached the point where information can be adjusted in real time to shape our perception of the world, what is the next step? What comes after digital censorship, mass surveillance, and the destruction of critical thinking? The answer may lie in the final phase of this process, where the very political and social structures we know will be reshaped to give way to a new global governance system, where borders and sovereignties become relics of the past, and humanity is unified under a model where a select few decide the fate of all. If we have come this far without realizing what was happening, the real question is, what is still to come? Society is being reshaped before our eyes. Every crisis, every new technology, and every legislative change seem to push us toward a future where individual autonomy will become an outdated concept. But this transformation is not happening abruptly or violently. On the contrary, it is being accepted without resistance, often even with enthusiasm. But what happens when people themselves begin to desire the chains designed to control them? Many imagine that modern tyranny will resemble past dictatorships, with authoritarian leaders imposing rules through brute force. But that is not the most effective form of control. True domination does not occur when people are coerced, but when they are convinced that there is no alternative. Propaganda, technology, and culture have been meticulously shaped to bring us to a point where we not only accept imposed restrictions, but come to see them as essential for our safety, health, and well-being. The first major pillar of this new order is the complete digitization of society. If we are already hyperconnected today, in the future, it will be impossible to exist outside the system. Digital identity will not just be a document, but the key to accessing all services, allowing governments and corporations to have absolute control over every individual. If financial digitization is already a well-established fact, the next step will be the fusion of identity and currency. The introduction of programmable central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, is already paving the way for this. But what happens once all physical money disappears? Will it be possible to live without relying on a system that decides when, where, and how we can spend? But this control goes far beyond money. The fusion of technology and biology will be promoted as an inevitable advancement. Companies like Neuralink are already developing brain-machine interfaces, and the World Economic Forum openly discusses a future where humans will be directly connected to artificial intelligence networks. The promise of cognitive enhancement and longevity will be enticing, but who will truly control these systems? If an algorithm can already limit your financial access based on your social behavior, what would stop it from controlling your own thoughts? Food will also be a key element in this new model. In recent years, we have seen growing hostility toward traditional agriculture. Small farmers are being systematically eliminated through environmental regulations, while megacorporations take control of food production. The narrative that meat and dairy are unsustainable has already become dominant, and the promotion of synthetic alternatives has become a global priority. But there is an even more concerning aspect of this transition: the impact of nutrition on human behavior and longevity. Diets based on ultra-processed foods and artificial proteins not only cause metabolic diseases but also affect cognition and the ability to think critically. Studies indicate that certain chemical compounds used in industrialized foods have subtle neurological effects, reducing mental energy and resistance to external commands. In a world where people increasingly consume lab-manufactured substances instead of natural products, will future generations even have the biological capacity to oppose this system? Beyond nutrition, the digital environment is also being designed to shape human psychology. Excessive exposure to information, combined with the instant nature of digital consumption, has led to an increasingly anxious and passive society. The concept of information overload has been widely studied. When the brain is constantly bombarded with an uninterrupted flow of stimuli, it loses the ability to process information critically. In other words, people become so overwhelmed with irrelevant data that they can no longer react to truly important issues. And this is not the only factor weakening society's mental resilience. Entertainment, once a form of leisure and reflection, has become a large-scale programming tool. The idea of digital realities, such as the metaverse, is being promoted as humanity's next great leap. But what if, in the future, this technology is used not just for entertainment, but to create an alternative environment where people can escape an increasingly oppressive reality? A world where dissatisfaction with the system doesn't matter, because those who feel oppressed can always retreat into a digital environment designed to distract them from real life. This dystopian future will not be imposed with weapons, but with convenience. People will not be forced into submission, but rather convinced that there is no reason to resist. Everything will be offered in a convenient and enjoyable way, until it becomes impossible to live outside the system. But is there a way to prevent this from happening? The first barrier against this control is constant questioning of the dominant narrative. If the system depends on the passive acceptance of the masses, the simple act of questioning is already a form of resistance. But questioning alone is not enough. It is necessary to seek real alternatives to escape dependence on this centralized model. This includes protecting digital privacy, avoiding dependence on major tech platforms, and seeking decentralized forms of economy and exchange. It also means supporting small producers and initiatives that promote food and energy autonomy. But above all, it means strengthening critical thinking and collective awareness so that society does not become so passive and apathetic that it accepts its own servitude as an inevitable fate. The future has not yet been decided. But the big question is, are we willing to fight for our autonomy, or will we simply accept the world being built for us? If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected some videos full of profound knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transforming your reality.